You're listening to Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. I spent the last 4 years trying to discover how to break the burnout cycle. And as a high achiever in a fast-paced world, it's very easy to slip back into old habits that leave you feeling overwhelmed and left behind. If you're anything like me, then you need to hear this. It's not your fault. Each episode is dedicated to help break the stigma around mental health in the workplace, end burnout culture for good, and the action steps that you can take today to do your part towards your personal growth and success. I am so happy that you're here today, and thank you again for joining us. Welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway, and thank you for taking the time to join the show today.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here and to chat with you.
Carly, when it comes to your burnout, where did it all begin?
Yeah, fair question. I honestly probably began the day that I came out of the womb. I think I'm just hardwired to put a lot of pressure on myself. And I mean, it goes back, obviously, this main story starts much more into my adulthood years, but I look back and I put a tremendous amount of pressure on myself from the time that I was 5 or 6 years old. Like even anecdotally, like I did this really interesting program in first and second grade where it was like a merged classroom and you graduated through the years. And my award upon graduation as a second grader, so like 7 years old, was the Research Project Initiator Award. All I would do was just ask my teacher, can I research this? Can I research this? Can I do a report? Can I do another one? Can I do it? So it's literally been from day one that I've put so much pressure on myself, and it very much started academically. If I fast forward to like seventh grade, I remember getting my first B ever and coming home hysterically crying, afraid they were going to kick me out of the gifted and talented program. So it's always been, I've had this, I think, very natural predisposition of putting a lot of pressure on myself. And I think anybody who's familiar with burnout and who's experienced it themselves knows that a huge nexus for that is the pressure that you end up putting yourself and never feeling like you're really living up to that. But the real part of it started for me when I graduated from college. And if you didn't get the sense from, kind of those two little anecdotes, I've very much always done what other people expected of me, what other people thought that I should be doing. And I had kind of created this picture of what I thought a successful life was supposed to be, that if you did really well in school and you got good grades, then you would get good internships, you'd get into a good college, you'd do your internships there, you would get a good job, you'd make a bunch of money, and then congratulations, like you win and you're happy now. That was the ticket. And so I did all of the things. I got straight A's, I graduated magna cum laude, I got all of the internships, and I started my career as a financial consultant at Ernst& Young, which was like the pinnacle of success of what you could have coming out as an economics major at my university. And I get to this job only to find that I am probably the most miserable that I have ever been. And that's where the burnout really starts. And I think that was the culmination of probably the last 22 years of my life of putting that just insane amount of pressure on myself. And it was like previously I knew I was like, I wasn't super happy in the internships. I might not have necessarily been happy studying for the exams. But I was like, oh, you're not supposed to be happy right now. This is all the means to the end. And then all of a sudden I got to what I thought at least that end was, only to realize that there wasn't just like some magical happiness waiting on it. And that was really where the burnout sort of began. That was the first big like aha awakening moment of my life is not going to go the way that I thought it was going to go for the last 22 years.
I think that's always the struggle when you think it's all a means to an end. And when you get to the
Yeah.
end, it's always okay, what's next? Because you're always
Yeah.
like striving to achieve more. And you're like, okay, the next end goal is this. And the closer you get to it, you're like, well, that was too easy to reach. I have to aim bigger. I have to aim better. That wasn't even a good stretch goal. And no matter how much you achieve, it's never good enough. The inner critic is always like, okay, we're not going to celebrate this. What's the next step? And it's always pushing for more.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was that piece of it, right? And I think there's also, I mean, I've struggled with imposter syndrome so much. And I felt this so much, especially graduating from college, because the one thing that I did feel confident in is I know I'm a really good student. I'm a really good studier. I do have an excellent memory, and that lends itself really well to traditional American education, where you memorize a bunch of stuff, regurgitate it on an exam, and then rinse and repeat. But I always had so much imposter syndrome about how that was going to translate into the real world, about was I actually going to be a good employee somewhere when I wasn't just memorizing and regurgitating. And so even getting into my first job at EY, I was like, I don't deserve to be here. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm never going to be successful at this. And then the reality was I got there and I was so unhappy and so not passionate about what I was doing, which was regulatory compliance. And that sounds about as exciting as it actually is. And so I wasn't then motivated to like put in all of this extra work to learn and to get better at it, because I'm like, I'm not meant to be sitting behind a desk all day crunching numbers. But because I'm a natural overachiever, I had such cognitive dissonance between, well, I don't really have this drive to want to work harder and get better at this, but that's the way that I am. And so I have to. And it was such this conflict that was going on in my own head. And then you also have the piece of me like, again, I'm not a risk taker, incredibly risk averse person, always done exactly what I'm supposed to do. I don't break the rules, nothing like that. It was supposed to be a very clear linear trajectory. And all of a sudden I get in this job and I'm realizing I can't do this for 6 months, let alone do this for the next 30 or 40 years. I'm going to have to make this huge shift. And that was so paralyzingly terrifying that it's really started to send me spiraling down this hole of like, what next? I'm not good enough. I'm never going to figure this out. This is terrible. This is the end of the world. And I was 22 years old and felt like I was in too deep to be able to like make an actual change in my life. So I look back on it now and it's quite amusing, but it was definitely anything but amusing at the time.
And that's it. It's the hindsight is just 2020. When you look back and you're like, well, that's how I was. But now that you're aware of how you were behaving, you can see the humor in it, or you can see, oh wow, that was actually a very serious moment that I just brushed off.
Yeah.
One of the things I feel a lot as well when it comes to burning out, especially in your 20s, people tend to brush it off as, well, you're too young to burn out. Oh, you can't really be experiencing burnout as a student. That's just exam pressure, and you'll get over that. Wait till you're in your 30s and 40s, then you'll know what it feels like. And
Well, that's
it's
such helpful
completely
advice,
yeah,
isn't it?
completely dismissing it.
And also such helpful advice. It's like if you're talking to somebody in their 20s who's claiming that they're experiencing burnout and you maybe don't agree with them, and your answer is, well, what you're feeling right now is actually not that bad and it's only going to get worse. What is the message that that tells to somebody who, regardless of your opinion about whether or not it's valid, is having the very real experience that this is as bad as it gets? I mean, it's just not helpful for sure.
And I feel the same. It happens a lot, even when you're not talking about your mental health, but even physically. Some people are feeling, oh, I don't feel well, or I have a hangover, or oh, I feel I'm a bit on the heavy side. And next thing someone goes, oh, well, wait till you're in your 30s and 40s and you won't be able to do anything about that. And it's completely in no way constructive or supportive in any way. It's just like, well, that doesn't help me in any way and just makes me feel bad about how am I going to be in 20 years from now if I don't like the way I am right now.
Yeah. And I have so many opinions on that as somebody that fast forward is now no longer a financial consultant and who's actually a strength and nutrition coach. The concept of wait till you're in your 30s and 40s, everything's going to go downhill. And I mean, the reality is, I mean, one, it doesn't have to, but also nobody wakes up one day in their 30s and 40s and they were in perfect health at 29 and they wake up at 30 and all of a sudden now they're not. It's a slow burn, right? It's a thing that builds. So if somebody in their 20s is feeling not that amazing, whether that's a mental or a physical thing, and somebody's response is, well, just wait until you're in your 30s and 40s. Well, yeah, of course, if that person who's not doing so hot in their 20s continues down that same trajectory, yeah, no brainer. It's going to be a lot worse when you're in your 30s and 40s. But there is so much that you can do, again, mentally and physically, that's actually going to set you up to feel even better in your 30s and 40s than you did in your 20s. Because, and I'm not in my 30s yet, so I can't speak to it. But from what I've heard from everybody, is that in your 30s, you really started to, you know yourself a lot better, and you know your body and you know your brain and your own little idiosyncrasies. So rather than saying, oh, well, it's all gone to crap right now, it might as well, it's just going to get worse. It's like you start making an active change now. And then instead of it being worse in your 30s and 40s, not only is it better than it could have ever been in your 30s and 40s, but it's also better than it was where you are currently right now, because you're not so stoked right now. And it only gets better if you work to actually improve it.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to the difference between your 20s and your 30s, and people are like, oh, in your 30s, you stop caring about what people think. And I think that's also what kind of contributes to burnout in the 20s, is because the imposter syndrome is real and you
Yeah.
care about what your superiors think a lot more. You've got that pressure to succeed more and to make yourself look bigger, to make yourself be the authority. No matter how many years of expertise you gain in your 20s, you know you don't have the confidence, or a lot of people don't feel like they have earned that confidence to be a manager or to have that authority, because they feel that someone in their 30s and 40s is senior to them. But as soon as you hit their 30s, you're like, oh wow, they were
Still a
basically
child.
me. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They're still
Yeah.
they're still winging it in their 30s, and you
Yeah.
realize, oh wow, it's. I think what's there was this thing I came across before, and it was like how we see our idols and how we see our parents in life and our leaders. That at first we idolize them because we think, oh, they are superior to us. We look to them for influence, for advice. And then when we realize that they're not infallible and they make their mistakes, sometimes we demonize them. We're like, oh, they're not the goody two shoes or the perfect idol that I thought they were. We demonize them, and next thing we humanize them, because we're like, oh, they're just human, the same as I make mistakes, of course they make mistakes too. You have to accept that not everyone is infallible and perfect, but you have to take their advice with a pinch of salt as well, that they're not
Yeah.
giving you 100% the truth, the right answer to everything, that they can only tell you from their own lived experience and their own expertise. So I think
Yeah.
that's kind of where people lie in their 20s. They're kind of probably idolizing the leadership rather than treating them as humans and being like, okay, I can have a one-to-one conversation with this person and come to the conversation treating them like a human, not making them out to be the big bad boss, but being like, okay, maybe they're stressed out too. I
Yeah.
think that was something that I came across in my awareness between late 20s and 30s.
Yeah, I'm in, scary to say, I am solidly in my late 20s now. And I feel like even the amount of experiences that I've gained in the last 6 or so years since graduating college, I feel like a completely different person. But I think that is such a big part of at least where I was at 22, was just you don't have the life experience to know what is, quote unquote, normal. So, like for me, as I was going through all of a sudden, okay, I'm miserable in this job that I'm supposed to be happy in, and that's supposed to be like the pinnacle of everything that I wanted it to be. You don't have the life experience to realize that that's a totally normal experience. You think that you're the only one that's living it. It's a complete departure from anything that you've ever experienced. And especially with like my parents and that generation, they all had the same job for 40 years. It doesn't matter if you didn't like it, it's just what you did. It wasn't that jumping around and doing different things. So my whole metric for comparison was, well, everybody has done the same job. They just got it right on the first go. You don't know enough to realize how unrealistic that is, or that even probably, with the exception of a few unicorns, the people that do that probably aren't the most fulfilled in the jobs, because how is it that the job you have at 22 is the job that fulfills you when you're in your 50s? That sounds insane to me. But yeah, it is. It's just wild what you get with the life experience. And I think that in itself, I mean, in addition to a lot of other steps that I've taken in the journey, has probably been the biggest antidote to the burnout thus far, which I know is not helpful, that it's like the answer is time, right? Like you want an answer that's going to help you right now. But that is one of the biggest things that's helped me is just having more time and more experiences and more perspectives and realizing that, like, yes, although the thing feels terrible in the moment, there's going to be another amazing thing and probably another terrible thing and another amazing thing and probably another terrible thing, and rinse and repeat. And all of that is okay and normal and very, very expected.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that people, it's hard when you're in that downward spiral and everything feels negative. And
Yeah.
and it's coming out of that being like, oh, but with time things will improve. But when you're in that moment, you're like, yeah, but right now everything is bad. You're thinking it's not 50-50. It just feels like 90-10 or 75-25. And you're like, there might be one happy moment, but I know it's going to pass. And
Yeah.
instead of realizing that all of the bad moments are going to pass too, and that there will be a happy moment come up, they just dwell on the negative. Or another
Yeah.
thing that I felt was when I was overstimulated by so much, I tried to dull out all the negative and just work on autopilot. And it's like, look, all these negative things happening, if I can just push them to the back of my mind and just focus on the work, I don't have to think about them. But at the same time, I was dulling out all the positive. So everything just felt numb.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's not a fun place to be in, definitely. And I mean, if you had told my 22-year-old self that was struggling at that point that my life would look the way that it did now, I mean, there's no way I ever would have believed you. I wouldn't have thought it was possible. I wouldn't have thought it was absolutely like capable of creating something like this out of that, because again, you just don't even know that you can. And I think that's the biggest, I'm sure we'll get into more of like how I got to where I am now, but the biggest takeaway is that like there's always a path out of it. It might not be the most comfortable path, it might not be the easiest path, but the one true thing in life is that things never stay the same, I think. So even though you are where you are right now and it feels like there's no path out of it, it's not going to stay like that. Like regardless whether you do something about it or you don't, like the world is going to have something to say about it, and there's no way any of us just stagnate for that long of a period of time.
And when it came to your burnout, when was it the moment that you realized that you needed to change? Was there
Yeah.
a rock bottom moment, or was it just, let's say, like a red flag or a moment like alarm bells?
Yeah, there was definitely an alarm bells red flag moment. So I worked in financial consulting, right? And I was doing regulatory compliance for EY. And the thing with EY is when you're a staff one, you are bottom of the totem pole. I got treated way better as an intern there than I did as a staff one. And when you're a staff one, you're working basically contracted on these projects for the company. And then in your free time, and I say free time in air quotes because there's not much of it, but in your free time, you're supposed to be assisting senior managers and partners on selling additional lines of business, which basically means that you're the PowerPoint bitch. You're just sitting in the meetings and you're listening to what they're saying and you're putting it into the presentation. And I remember sitting in a meeting with the senior manager that was on my project, and we were talking about pitching whoever they were pitching. And they were like, you know what? We'll just pitch. We'll give them a model and then we'll put a model on it. And then let's put a model on that. And we'll put another model on that. And then we'll just do that. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, I know I'm new here and I know this doesn't make, but like this makes no sense. And somebody else said, can we do that? And he was like, oh no, absolutely not, but we'll never have to, and they'll still buy it anyway. And that was the moment that I was just like, this is all fake. This is all like this is nonsense. And I cannot get behind this. And I'm looking at this person who's mega successful, right? And I'm like, I don't care how mega successful he is. That cannot be me in 20 years. And that was the big red flag that was like, I gotta get out of this place. This is not for me. But to be honest, that wasn't the rock bottom in itself. That is kind of what facilitated the rock bottom, because at that point, I was still able to lie and pretend to myself that like this could be okay. This was just first couple of months jitters. It would get better. I'll go on another project. It'll be fine. And having that experience was what really reinforced to me that unequivocally no. this is not the place that I can stay. And realizing that, that was like the real turning point that sent me spiraling. Because again, having been someone who's always done exactly what I'm supposed to do, and now realizing that what I thought I was supposed to do is not, in fact, what I'm actually going to be doing, and then realizing the complete fear that comes along with having to change the trajectory of your life and your career path when you think it's too late to do it. That's really what sent me down the complete rabbit hole of pain, if you will, of mental anguish.
And that rabbit hole, how long did that go for? Was it months? A year?
Well, I'm a pretty when I set my mind on something, my parents would call it impulsive, but I when something becomes apparent to me, I'm not very good at sitting with it and just festering in it. So I only made it at EY 6 months before I actually left, which is short enough that I had to give them back the sign-on bonus and everything. It was such a short amount of time. But I actually ended up, so behind the scenes to that, although I was miserable in my like day job, I had fallen into powerlifting and strength training, and that was the other kind of thing that was giving me sanity outside of all of that. And that's an important caveat because it really crafts the rest of what that story becomes. And so that was really my like North Star. That was the thing that was keeping my head kind of like just bobbing above water, was that I had something else to really feel passionate about and focus all of my efforts on. But yeah, once I had that realization of absolutely not, no way I can stay here, I mean, I started looking for other jobs pretty immediately. And I will say I got very lucky in this. I found what I still to this day call my unicorn of a job, which was a job working as an account manager for a meal prep delivery service. So I basically managed 200 different CrossFit gyms to help increase client retention and like penetration within each of those locations. And I say it's my unicorn because I was able to do something I was really passionate about, which at that point I was starting to realize fitness was the thing, which again, you take somebody that's very risk averse, very type A, very follow the rules, and you say, I think your career path is going to be in fitness. Those two things do not jive. That is not like the shiny degree you get to take home to grandpa that he feels really, really proud of. At least it's not historically. And so it was the unicorn because I got to do something that was still risk averse. It was still a traditional job, but I got to be in the fitness space. And that was really my first parlay into it. And that felt like, oh my God, I've figured it out. I can do this for forever. It's amazing. And then the universe kind of laughed in my face when 6 months later, that company went out of business. And then it was like right back down into the spiral. And there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes here, but I had gotten married and my husband and I were trying to move in together. We had been doing long distance. And so I ended up moving in with him because I lost that job, which was a huge silver lining that I wasn't able to do previously. But then COVID happened and all of those things. But the long and short of it is that I, after that job, tried to get myself certified in training, having no idea what I was going to do with it. But then after COVID, had to go and get another real person job when like real life kind of resumed. And I jumped through, gosh, 3 different sales, account management, operations, just like little different jobs that I was trying to convince myself this one will be better because it's a smaller company. This one will be better because it's a different team. This one will be better because I really like the manager. And just making these really small, kind of mundane shifts, trying to find the thing that was going to light that fire. And the spoiler alert is that nothing did. And the true rock bottom happened about a year into job number 6 when I realized, oh my God, I'm back in the exact same spot again, realizing that I cannot do this job again and I cannot make another half-assed little switch to another job that maybe will be okay. And that was the moment I realized I had to make a really radical change in my life. And that led into, frankly, what was my first full-blown depressive episode and just complete turmoil in my life, because that was the moment I knew I had to make a really big change. And it was so scary. And it was scary all over again in similar ways that it was previously with all of the other jobs, but also so much more because as somebody who really fears failure and really fears not living up to her potential, I've now had 6 jobs that I failed at, right? At least in my own head that I failed at because I couldn't stick with it. And the idea of having to face yet another failure and have to go and make this huge, really, really scary change, that I did not know what to do with at all.
And let's say you have your own, let's say, fear of failure, but you also have like hanging over you, what are my parents going to think, what are my friends going to think? Oh,
Yeah,
I've been in and out of so many jobs, or I'm out of work at the moment, and I'm supposed to I've been always striving to be the successful one, and I'm
yeah.
not keeping that image. So
Right. And I'm
there's
looking at all of my friends too who like have graduated and who have had a job and then had another job that built on that first job and they're climbing their ladders respectively. And I'm starting at the bottom of the totem pole at every company that I go to because I'm switching into completely different industries and completely different roles because I have no idea what I want to be doing. And for somebody who has at least thought that I knew what my life was going to look like from the time that I was 5 or 6 to now all of a sudden being in that phase of my life and having no idea what things are going to look like even next month. Again, that was like not something that my brain knew what to do with.
And I find that interesting as well, where you said you were looking at your friends and seeing them climb the ladder in their respective
Yeah.
roles. And I felt I was the same in my career. I knew a lot of people who looked at me and said, "Oh, he's got a great job. He's doing something he loves. He's been there. I was there for nearly 10 years, and I was so burnt out in my role,
Yeah.
but I felt I couldn't reach out to those friends to say how stuck I felt.
Because they're
And
jealous
because
of
they
you.
were because
Yeah.
they were like, oh, but you should be grateful. You should be so
Yeah.
grateful of what you have. And I was like, okay, I can't talk to you now, can I?
Yeah, it's never fun when you're really, really struggling and but you feel like you can't share that with anybody. And I was watching with my friends, but even more closely, I was watching it with my husband. He's had 3 jobs, I guess, since we've graduated, but every job has been a linear step and a linear progression. And again, like I'm so proud of him and I love that for him. And it's afforded us a lot of amazing opportunities that we would not have been able to have while I have been figuring out my life. But yeah, it was really hard to see the stark contrast of somebody that is really loving it and is really successful and yes, burnt down in his own right, but such a difference from the experience that I was having.
So when it came to like you said your relationship with powerlifting and strength
Yeah,
training, was that, let's say, the what gave you structure in terms of when you burnt
yeah,
out? Was that your lifeline?
100%. 100%. That was the only continuous thing that I had in my life from the time that I graduated college. When nothing else was certain and nothing else was stable, my workout plan was, and controlling my nutrition was, and competing was. And so, as I was going through all of these different jobs and all of these things, throughout that, I was still waking up at 4:30 a.m. every single day and hitting my workouts at the gym. And I was doing that before I commuted into the city and before I would start work. And it slowly but surely became this thing that I was so tremendously passionate about. And that's ultimately what pulled me out of this huge spiral, because at least then I knew, okay, this is really scary and this is not ever what I imagined I would be pursuing or a way that I thought that I'd be able to be successful. But I knew that if I went down that career path, that would be something that I would actually want to stick with. That would be something that I would actually wake up every single day and be excited to do. And so, seriously, the gym saved me in so many different ways and continues to in a lot of ways. It's a even bigger part of my life now. But yeah, had it not been for that, I wouldn't have known what the next step was, which ultimately was at that point getting myself certified as a coach and deciding that I want to start my own business and that I want to help people do this thing that I'm doing and that I fell in love with and that's given me so much joy and so much structure. But again, I'm not a risk taker. So the idea of starting a business is horrifying. So I finally left that last job in the middle of again, what was complete rock bottom for me, and got a job working full time in person at a gym to like learn the ropes. Where once again, I joined at the very bottom of the totem pole. I was surprised that they hired me because I didn't have a degree in this. It was just a certification that I had started with. And I've since done what I'm on my fifth or sixth certification now for different related fields. And I'm a lot more of an expert in the field than I was when I started it. But yeah, thank God for that underlying passion that I had for lifting. It's the thing that kept me afloat while I was going through it. And it's also the life raft that really pulled me out of it.
I think when it comes to having a fitness routine though as well, and it was something that it's striking a balance
Yeah.
because I felt as well part of my recovery and I thought I was doing the right thing. But I found that I used to go running a lot. And I
Yeah.
found that running had a much more negative impact than a positive impact because I was running away from my emotions and my thoughts.
Yeah.
When I was running, I didn't have to think because I was so focused on my breathing. I was so focused on my heart rate, and I was focused on the endorphins that runners high at the end of a long run. When I got home, it was back to reality. But
Yeah.
when I'm doing strength training, I get such mental clarity when I'm training in the gym and they're like, oh, what music or what's your workout music that you listen to when you're in the gym? And I'm like, I'm listening to podcasts. I'm listening to the likes of Napoleon Hill and all these really old recordings and just all of this just great books. I'm listening to audiobooks when I'm in the gym. And they're like, how can you concentrate? I'm like, but that's when my mind is clearest. It's when I'm taking control of like slow lifts, and the 3 to 5 minute rest um between my
Really heavy
strongest lifts,
sets.
the
Yeah.
really heavy sets, exactly. And I'm like, that's when I have that mental clarity and the time where I can just wind down and focus. And so it
That
was,
is,
yeah,
that's very, very interesting to me.
when everyone else is pounding out
Because
their heavy metal or whatever.
yeah, that is definitely, I will say, I cannot relate to you on that one because I am for sure the metal in my ears and trying to drown everything else out because for me, my brain is nonstop running, running, running. And so that time, similar, I think, to your running, is that time for me to quiet it down and not to try to push it away and pretend it's not there, but it is that little bit of a like reprieve time for me. But it also is the thing that gives me structure where there was not otherwise structure. And that was something I think that relates a little bit more to what you're saying of like not using it as a tool to run away, but using it as a tool that gave so much structure to where there was just complete anarchy.
Yeah, I think I think the other point before I started ranting about my what I do in the gym, but it's when people start using it, as you said, they're using it as a either a form, they're trying to use it for the right thing. They're trying to use, oh, if I start implementing more fitness into my lifestyle, things will get better. But when you're so physically and emotionally, mentally exhausted, and you feel that, oh, I'm being told just to take more action, that will give me more energy, but it's actually taking more energy that then
Yeah.
it's instead of refocusing the energy that they have and prioritizing, okay, if I dedicate more time to taking care of my health rather than this downward spiral I'm going in with bad habits, I would have more energy and I'd feel better. But I think it's a matter of people trying to keep the same stress cycle, the same things that are
Mhm.
stressing them out and burning them out, and adding fitness, trying to add time, and then they're probably lacking on sleep because they're trying to throw more fitness in, and then they're falling behind on recovery.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts about this because there's one piece that is when you are experiencing extreme stress and like extreme burnout. And obviously the first instinct of most people is to say, we'll just take some stuff off of your plate, right? And that's great advice if there is fat to trim in your schedule. But there are scenarios, and there are certainly people that I have worked with where there just isn't any fat to trim. There aren't things that you can remove. You can't just chuck one of your kids out the door and say, sorry, I don't have time for you today, right? Like you don't get to. And so one of the best things that you can do almost paradoxically is actually add something that's going to give you a little bit more of that relief if there is something that you can't take away. But the important caveat there is to add something that is additive, right? You want to add something that makes you feel better and more rejuvenated and not something that just adds to what inevitably feels like this huge, never-ending, overwhelming to-do list. And so the best piece of advice, right, is like, say you are somebody that is in the depths of burnout right now and feels like there's nothing you can take off of your plate to change, and you're thinking about adding something to your routine. Don't think about like what you can just do today. Think about what you could do every single day, and not just what you can do, but what you want to do, what you would look forward to doing. Because for me, like when I add a fitness thing, when I added fitness into my routine, I added it because I loved doing it. And the reason why it was such a staple in my life was not because I woke up every morning and was like, ugh, I have to go to the gym right now as another thing that like was overwhelming me. It was like, oh my God, I get to go and do this for myself. And that was the time that I was giving myself. And it doesn't have to be an hour-long workout, right? It can be, I'm super overwhelmed. And so I'm going to go stand out on my back deck and soak in some sunlight for 60 seconds, or I'm going to go for a 5 or 10 minute walk after I eat lunch, or I'm going to read for 10 minutes before I go to bed. It can be anything, but focus on adding something to your routine that you genuinely look forward to and that adds value, because sometimes adding can make things a lot better when subtracting isn't really an option.
Yeah, that is a good point because yeah, and I think as well when it comes to adding things that are beneficial, like as you said, bringing in exercise, I think you could have
Mhm.
a better night's sleep as well when you have that endorphin relief, and that
Oh, for sure.
stress release as well. That some people feel like, yeah, when they're trying to say that, oh, I don't sleep well at night, and you say, how about you go for a 20-minute walk before bed? It was like, well, I don't have the time for that, but I think going for a 20-minute walk to wind down before bed, rather than going for a 10, 20-minute run, at least it's kind of there are small ways of bringing activity into your life and
Yeah.
beneficial activity that actually help to improve other areas.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think I've even said this yet, but right, I am a coach. That's what I do now. And I did ultimately end up like leaving my full-time job at the gym and launching my own business where I do not just strength and nutrition, but really focus on the holistic lifestyle factors that help you feel your best. And I work with a ton of people that are experiencing burnout and that are having struggles with work-life balance, because nobody really hires a coach just for the training plan. You hire a coach because you know what you should be doing, but you don't know how to actually be doing it. And so a huge part of what I work with clients on is how do we add those little things to your routine that help you feel better, that help you sleep better, that give you more capacity to handle the other things that are going on in your day. And when it comes, I mean, sleep is like the most important thing, right? It has such dividends and everything else that you do in your day. And similarly, if you're not getting enough of it, it really makes it very hard to focus in a lot of other areas. But yeah, it doesn't have to be a big 20-minute walk. It can be a 5 minute stretch routine, or even a 60-minute stretch routine that you do, or a few pages of a book, or a couple of, 10 deep breaths that you do when you're laying in bed. There are so many different systems that people can have that work for them, but you ultimately have to find the thing that, again, fits into your lifestyle and the thing that you enjoy doing. Because you're never anything that like, think about like, I don't know, going and getting a pizza on a Friday night. Nobody says like, ugh, I have to go get that pizza right now. It's like, no, I'm super excited to go and get that pizza. And the same way, when you're adding something like that to your routine, you want it to be something that you look forward to doing and that you enjoy and that you genuinely see value in. And by see value, I mean that it really connects back to whatever your bigger goal is. So not just like, I'm going to stretch because I should be stretching, but if your goal is sleeping better because sleeping better is going to help you wake up feeling better and tackle your day better, well then, okay, getting that 5 minute stretch in at night directly connects to that goal of me sleeping better. And that's really where I see the value in it.
Yeah, and I like how the power of words and what you said there is what kind of holds us back from doing something. You said, "Oh, I should do that stretching routine,"
Yeah.
rather than and then rephrasing it to, "I want to do that 5 minute stretching routine because I want a good night's sleep.
Yeah. There is so much in the verbiage and the way that we talk to ourselves. And I'm a big psychology nerd. My undergrad or half of my undergraduate degrees are in psychology, and I've since done a couple of certifications on health mindset coaching. So, really applying the principles of psychology through a health and fitness lens. And there is so much to be said about the word choice of it. So, when we say something like, I should do this or I have to do this, it really does imply that it's something that we don't want to be doing. And the reality is, if you ever want to understand why you're not doing something, it's because you don't want to be doing it, because you're not seeing the value in it. So even if you don't necessarily believe that you want to do it or that you get to do it, just saying it out loud and replacing that word kind of tricks your brain into thinking it. So like when I hear clients and check-ins say like, I should go and do that workout today, I try to encourage them to rephrase of like, I get to go and do that workout today, right? Because then it reminds you that it's a privilege that you get to move your body, that you are able-bodied and capable of doing those things, that you have the time and the resources to create that space for yourself. But the other big word choice, if while we're on the topic, is the but versus end. That's my favorite one because you'll hear all the time like, I want to work out, but I'm really tired, right? And you say something like that, and it's almost like saying but. It makes the I'm really tired negate the fact that you want to work out. It's like, I can't work out because I am tired. And that's the rhetoric that you hear, and that's what your brain kind of latches onto. But if you shift that from I want to work out and I'm really tired, right away it's like, okay, I'm working out and I'm tired and that's okay. It's realizing that like your negative emotions can exist within the realm of all of those other things, and they don't necessarily have to control the actions that you ultimately decide to take.
That's a good one. I haven't heard the but in the end
The but in
before.
the end is a big
Yeah,
one.
it's
Yeah.
it's a good, it's a very good one because yeah, I think a lot of people they get controlled by their butts,
Yeah.
and it holds them back from so much. And I think that
Yeah.
that's a big one. Is like, but I'm always tired, but I have to do this,
Yeah.
and rather than and you can simply 3 letter, 2 3 letter words,
Yeah.
and the power of just rephrasing to and is like, it's like I want to go to the gym and I have to do this, and it's like okay, it's just a matter of
It's just, yeah, it just is.
not just canceling one out. It's like okay, that just means I have to make time for both.
Yeah, it's just, it's honestly, I will say the biggest lesson for me in the last probably 6 months has been realizing that a lot of things can exist together at the same time, that you can feel a lot of different things and not necessarily let those feelings dictate the way that you act, right? So, like, if you, one of my favorite tools for it is kind of creating some distance between yourself and whatever the feeling is. So, take like stress or anxiety as an example, right? Like you're feeling really stressed or really anxious. And you might even say to yourself, like, I am stressed, I am anxious, right? And you're connecting that emotion with your identity. When you say that, like, you are stressed, you and stress, you're merged, you're one thing, you can't possibly get away from it. But there's a tool from acceptance commitment therapy, which is you kind of notice in names. So instead of saying, I am stressed, you might say, I am noticing the feeling of stress right now. And just adding in some of those extra words, all of a sudden, I, Carly, my identity is not stressed. It's just I, Carly, am noticing that there are some feelings of stress in my orbit right now. And it helps you kind of separate away from those things. And that makes it so much easier for you to then act the way that you actually want to act instead of just acting the way that your feelings like to decide that we should act.
Yes, I came across that as well. I think it was positive intelligence, and they have the sage perspective of your
Mhm.
emotions and all the different perspectives that you have in your life, and it's having that kind of higher awareness of how you feel things instead of
Yeah,
saying like I I am judgmental of everything. I am um very critical of everything around me, and like oh I'm very hateful, or I'm really angry about certain things. Instead of saying I am angry, it's like okay, I notice that I'm experiencing anger right now,
yeah,
and you kind of take the step back and you're like okay, and it's it's like I can feel the emotion. I can then regulate the emotion. I don't need to have a massive or bottle it in and having a massive emotional outburst and deal with the consequences. I
Yeah.
can see it for what it is. Do I choose to feel it right now? Do I choose to address it another way? It's kind of, I always like to take a step back. Sometimes feelings can be overwhelming, and I think it
Yeah.
was
Oh, for sure.
especially during burnout when I wasn't processing emotions. Anything was overstimulating then, and it was a choice of, is it going to be an outburst, or do I just dull this emotion and choose to ignore it?
Yeah.
And it becomes a battle of, okay, how long can you go on ignoring something before
Yeah.
it before there's an outburst, or how much can you dull? If you keep on dulling the emotions, again, you're dulling the negative, but you're also dulling your positive experiences as well. So
Yeah.
it's
And I
that
think
constant battle.
yeah, and so much of this, what we're talking about, it's like it's also ironic, at least for me, again, in like my story of burnout, because it is such a full circle in that. So, like, my coaching style now is so very much rooted in the psychology, right? Of like what we're talking about and helping people to understand not just what they need to do, but why they should do it and how to incorporate it into their lives in a way that is sustainable. And I coach now as a result of the experiences that I have had. I am the coach that I wish that I had when I was on my own health and fitness journey and experiencing all of that burnout simultaneously. And these were skills that I didn't have that contributed to so much more of that like angst and that misery and that not knowing how to pull myself out of it. And it was almost like ironically, again, this is where like the universe likes to laugh in your face. Where as much as I wish I didn't have to have those experiences, it's those experiences that have now given me the tools to coach the way that I do now, to not only make a huge difference in my own life and my own perspective and the way that I look at things, but to now have the tremendous privilege to be able to share that with others and to give others the tools that I had to learn the really, really hard way by myself. That's been the coolest thing for me, is to see how this all connects and how powerful these messages are and how powerful these skills are. But then realizing that like doing this as my career in what pulled me out of my own burnout is ultimately, I think, what healed me of that journey and kind of the trauma, for lack of a better word, of having that sort of an experience. So it's been a really cool, very scary, very ridiculous, but really cool ride. And now sitting kind of on the other end of it, or at least on the other side now, there'll be way more on the journey. This is like, I think the point of why I experienced all of that is to be able to take it and to now get to pay it forward.
And that brings a very interesting question. I always have the what ifs. And I was like, what if I never burnt out? So what if you loved that Ernst and Young job, or maybe you just didn't. It didn't trigger you enough to want to leave after 6 months, and you're like, okay, it's not what I really want to do, but it's bearable. I might give
Yeah.
it 5, 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good question. And I mean, I think I would answer your what if with another what if, that if I say it was tolerable enough that I stayed with it, I think I probably would have always wondered what if, what else maybe, like what else could there have been, what could have been better. And I just don't think ultimately that would have been a fulfilling journey for me. And also at this point, and from this vantage point, and it's easy for me to say this, but I I wouldn't be the, and I hesitate to say adult because I don't feel that way, but I wouldn't be the adult that I am now without those experiences of struggle and adversity. And I think that if I had stayed in that job and never had any struggles or never had any issues with it, then one, not only would I not be living to my full potential and getting to wake up every single day and do something that is a full body yes, but like I just wouldn't have those experiences. And I value those experiences so much in creating the person that I am today. I think I'd be a completely different person and probably one that I'm not as proud of as the version of myself that stands here now, is like a quite happy and fulfilled and still very much a work in progress, but so much more evolved than I would have been if I just did the thing that I thought I was supposed to do from the beginning.
And here's a little bit of a curveball question.
Sure.
from that, do you feel that that burnout itself is just part of the human experience? That you wouldn't be where you are today if it wasn't for burning out?
Yes and no. So 100% for me, I would not be where I am now had I not had a complete burnout experience. And so I say yes because I don't think that anybody in life reaches their full potential without facing some adversity, without facing some struggle. That's how we grow, right? We're forced to grow and we're pushed outside of our comfort zone. And when things don't go exactly according to plan, if your life has gone 100% according to plan, you've never had to learn and troubleshoot and strategize. But the reason why I say no is because I wish that there was a world in which you didn't have to experience extreme suffering and extreme anxiety and extreme burnout to ultimately get to this place of positivity. And so what I would hope, and the big thing that I think about for future state me, like when I eventually have my own family and my own kids, is like, how do I help them experience adversity and experience struggle, because you have to have that to grow, but to realize that it's normal and that it's okay and that it's not so insurmountably scary. It has to be a little bit scary to push you out of your comfort zone. So, like, it's a yes and a no. I just wish it was a little bit less intense, but there needs to be some level of fear and intensity, I think, to push you to the next step of where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, I feel it's when I see people wearing burnout as a badge of honor that they feel,
Yeah.
oh, I earned my burnout. I reached this certain level of success and now I can say that I'm burnt out. And other people feeling that they haven't reached that level of success yet. So they don't want to admit that they're burnt out because they're like, oh, I haven't reached that level where I can say that I'm burnt out. Because people say, oh, well, you haven't been that successful. How how could you have had that amount of stress in that great job you have that
Yeah.
that you could have burnt out? And that's where people feel like burnout is part of the human experience, that you have to achieve a certain level of success before you can wear that badge of honor. And at the same time, it's still a shameful thing
Yeah.
that people say like, oh, burnout usually only happens to the really successful people. So whatever you're experiencing probably isn't burnout. You're just mentally incompetent or weak
Yeah.
or something like that, and they just throw that shame.
Yeah, and that it almost makes me giggle because burnout is such a subjective experience, right? It's your own emotions, all of your emotions are your own subjective experience. And if you are somebody that's thinking to yourself, I'm not successful enough to be burnt out, you're probably burnt out. Because if you're having that thought of like, I'm not even allowed to be burnt out, I haven't earned it, chances are you probably are, right? And it's there's no like criteria for it. There's nothing that says, oh, you're only allowed to be burned out if your paycheck is above X. You could be burned out doing literally anything. You could be burned out making $0, right? Like it really just comes from the amount of pressure that you put on yourself comparatively to everybody else. But yeah, it did. When you were saying it, it really did make me giggle. Like, I'm not allowed to be burned out. I haven't earned it. And there's no earning of your burnout. It's something that just happens. And like I said, it happened for me at 22 and again at 24. And it'll probably happen for me again at another point in time, right? Like there's very much burnout that's associated with owning your own business. It's just for me now, it's burnout, not burnout, but for lack of a better word, burnout with a little bit more purpose, right? There's passion behind it versus I'm just doing this thing that is making me miserable that I have to be doing. But gosh, yeah, you definitely don't have to earn your burnout. It finds you.
Yeah, I always found it like when someone would say that, I'd say you wouldn't say the same thing if someone broke their leg. And you were
Right.
like, and it's like, oh, you broke your leg. Oh, but you didn't earn it. You have to do it
Right. You
heroically,
didn't do it
saving
doing
a
a
dog or
backflip on a
falling out of a tree.
motorcycle.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah,
just
yeah.
tripped. Yeah.
And it like you wouldn't say about any physical energy, but when it comes or physical injury, but when it comes to something that you can't visualize or can't see, something that's
Yeah.
below the
So
surface,
subjective.
it's exactly so subjective that it's only, let's say, you can only you can see the symptoms because you're feeling them. And as soon as you say them out loud, people are like, oh, but you can't be feeling that because I can't
Yeah.
see why you be feeling that way.
Yeah. I have to imagine that these conversations are so cathartic for you in realizing again that, like, because it's really hard when you're in it, you feel so alone. You feel like I'm the only one experiencing this, everybody else has it figured out. And for me, like, just being able to talk to people who have experienced similar things is so cathartic and making me feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. I'm not alone. Everybody feels this way to some extent. So I wonder if that was a little bit of your own selfish intent in starting the podcast, of having some of these cathartic conversations, of like realizing that everybody else is going through it and realizing that you're not alone throughout it. At least that has been my own subjective experience with it.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting that you say that because when I first started the podcast, I didn't really know what I wanted to talk about. I just knew that I had to document my experience because I didn't see many other people talking about it, especially men talking about their burnout experience. So I started talking about, look, this is what I experienced. First few episodes, I was like, okay, this is a bit raw. I really don't know what I want to talk about, but I just want to share how I felt because I might look back 20 years from now and being like, oh, and I might, downplay how I actually felt. So I
Yeah.
was like, look, this, I'm just sharing what I learned over my past 3 years in recovery and let me know what you think. And I got a lot of backlash. I got so much negative backlash because people were not comfortable with me talking about my mental health. They were like, oh, you can't talk about your mental health on social media. That's career suicide. You'll never get employed again. You can't say that you're stressed out at work. That makes your company look bad. And it just brought up a lot of interesting points. I was like,
Well, yeah, because they should look bad. Like, why is that on you to hold it in to preserve their integrity, right? It's like, gosh, if they're driving you to the point of burnout, it's like they deserve to be called out for that. That's a culture that needs to be called out, which, and I imagine too, you experiencing that when you were trying to find your own outlet, like, God, how challenging must that have been to be like, well, I'm trying to navigate my way out of it, and everybody else is like, nope, not this way, not allowed to do it this way, find another one.
but it was interesting that they were straight on the defensive, that they didn't want anyone talking about their mental health or being stressed at work. Where, like, a lot of people come on and they blame the big bad boss for burning them out. But people don't get stressed out at work if they don't care about their work. If it, you have to care about what you do
Yeah,
to a certain extent to feel stressed about it. There
yeah,
has to be some amount of care that goes into your work. Most of the time it's when someone gets demoralized or not recognized for their work that they start feeling underappreciated and underrecognized. Then of course they're not going to pay as much attention to the work that they do, and that leads to the likes of quiet quitting. And if you feel you're going into a job on autopilot and you're not getting recognized and you feel there's no progress or no growth, then that can burn you out over time. You feel that you're not getting reciprocated anything for the energy you put in. And but the point I was trying to make to them, I was like, yes, I got stressed out and I want to talk about that stress because I know I'm not the only one feeling it. And I want to advocate for other people who are feeling this way that they can get help. But people were quicker to shut me down because they did not want to be aware. They did not want to make
yep,
that work because it is hard work. I was like, this isn't something that you can fix overnight. But once you're on the journey to recovery, you can help to stop yourself from relapsing. You can help to, you know, that you're pushing forward in the right direction and not no longer in that downward spiral. And people started to kind of shy away from it or to deflect it, and we're like, Eugene, we know you, we know the kind of person you are. At the time I was working like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. shift, and I knew that I never had the energy to go to the gym after work. So I joined a 24/7 gym and used to go before work. So I'd get up at 3:30 a.m., hit the
yep.
gym, finish around 5:20, and then head to work for 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And they were like, that is absolutely psychotic. So whatever burnt you out, whatever you're feeling is probably not what I'm feeling, because that is absolutely psychotic behavior. And whatever approach you used was probably
I got the
just as
same thing.
psychotic.
Yeah,
So
I
it
got the
probably
same
won't work for
exact
me.
thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I get that for sure. No, and I mean, anybody that comes across usually as being very critical of a thing that you're doing, it's probably because it's turning the mirror on themselves and it's a thing that they're not ready to experience yet. And it's unfortunate, obviously, that the natural predisposition is for others to not let that mirror turn on themselves and to not look inwards for it, but to kind of negatively reflect it outwards on the people that are trying to make a difference. But you see it all the time in so many different arenas, and it makes a ton of sense. But I'm very glad that you're doing what you do, because even in this conversation, it's always cathartic to talk to somebody that's had a similar experience to make you feel less alone in what you're going through. Because man, the world is a scary place. There's so many scary experiences, and it's cool when you get to share it with other people and realize that you're all going through it and you're all having a really hard time with it, but also that there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. I think that was one of the things that came around when people said that they couldn't relate to my story. It was meant to shut me up. It was meant to say, well, they can't relate to me, so why bother sharing? And that sparked me to say, well, what if I'm not the only person who feels this way? Maybe there's someone else who wants to share their story. And that's when I started the interviews. I just reached out and said, hey, does anyone want to share their burnout story? And there were a lot of people that had never ever been on a podcast before. They were interested in being on a podcast, but they didn't know how to share their story. And I was like, look, let's just jump on a Zoom call and have a chat and see where it goes. And then some of them, they had their first podcast episode. And I was like,
Yeah.
this story would never have been shared with the world. They never would have shared their story if they didn't have a platform to do it. And also, I had other people reach out, and they were like, "Oh, I just never had a, an opening to have this conversation before." And they just listen in, and it's all about creating a safe space to hear others have that shared experience, and also to normalize talking about feeling stressed at work. That yes,
Yeah.
you don't have to just keep on blaming the big bad boss. It's like, no, this can be a very constructive conversation that you can have with your family, with your friends, with your colleagues, with your manager, with your
Yeah.
leaders. That
100%.
there is help out there, and that you're not alone.
Yeah, totally. Could not agree more. Very well summarized. Almost like you talk about this all the time.
Almost like I talk about this all the time. I have like sometimes people get kind of caught off guard and they hear about what I talk about, and they're like, "Oh, so do you like talk about me on your podcast? Do you talk about how I treat people? Do you talk about how I feel about my work?" And I'm like, "Well, you're just going to have to tune in and see." So, Carly, if anyone is interested in um, hearing about your coaching and how that
Yeah.
can help them with their lifestyle, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
For sure. Yeah. So you can check out my website, which is www.moxiebarbell.com, Moxie Barbell. And then you can also follow me on all of the socials. So I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Moxie Barbell. I do a ton of evidence-based content on all things strength training, nutrition, and a lot of psychology and mindset and just general lifestyle work in there. So yeah, if you're on your own sort of journey there, feel free to follow along. My DMs are always open if anybody wants to chat. But yeah, Moxie Barbell on the web and all of the socials is the best place to get a hold of me.
Awesome, Carly. It was great having you on the show. It was great, such a great conversation. I
Yeah,
definitely
so,
want
so
to.
fun.
I'd probably listen back to this again. It was like just sip my coffee and be like, "Yeah, that was a good chat. We covered a lot right there."
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear it. And yeah, I'm excited for everybody else to take a listen. And I hope that some people resonate with it and feel a little bit less alone.